Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in. Today I'm going to be going through the installation process of our new Folsom handlebars for the Indian Chieftain and Roadmaster. So having the bike upright will make this handlebar job a lot easier. So if you have a wheel chock or a center stand or something similar, that'll definitely come in handy. You don't need one of those to get the job done. You can do the whole thing on the kickstand. If you do have a chock or a center stand, before you put it in there, we're gonna do one thing, and we're gonna get the center console removed. And to do that, there's a bolt up front, and it's a lot easier to get to when the handlebars are turned. So we're just gonna back that bolt out, put the bike on the chock or the center stand, and then we'll move on with the rest of the process. Just gonna turn the handlebars. And that really opens it up and gives us a lot more room to work with in there. And here it is close up, is that brass bolt or screw right there. So we're just gonna go ahead and back that out. It's a 6mm Allen. And it also threads into a little rubber bushing inside there. So if you can't get it out, you can just go ahead and leave it as long as it's backed all the way out. Here's a close-up of what's going on with this front screw in our tank console. So here's a little rubber bushing, and that just fits inside that slot. And then our screw goes inside that rubber bushing, and then it threads into a bracket on the tank. So when you're backing this bolt out, what can happen is it's just spinning and spinning and spinning, but you can't get it out because this little rubber bushing is holding it in place. It just won't let it fall out. So if you're backing that thing out for a while and it's not coming, it's probably already out. It's just being held in place by that rubber bushing. And then when you go to put the console back on, you want to make sure this rubber bushing is seated fully in there, and then you can get the screws started, but you want to make sure that's fully seated in there, because if it's just a little bit off, it'll be really difficult to find the threads that are on the bracket on the tank. So just make sure that's fully seated in there when you go to put it back on. So now I put the bike in our chock just to keep it upright for the rest of the process. So to finish getting this removed, we have another screw right here. It's a 4mm Allen. And then if you have a leather strap, that leather strap is riveted or held in place with a plastic rivet underneath the seat. So if you have the strap, you'll have to take the seat off. To do that, we have our side covers here. And then we have a 6mm Allen, and it's the same on both sides. And you can slide the seat back, lift it out of the way. Now you can either remove this plastic rivet with a little screwdriver, or what I do is I just pull down the strap a little bit and remove the strap from that rivet, just reinstall it later. Then we have our screw right here. Now we can remove this whole thing, and one thing you'll have to do is just lift it up a little bit and then slide it out either to the left or the right, because it won't clear the dash. Once you get it out of there, we'll have a couple of wired connections here that we need to disconnect. And depending on the options your bike has, you might have one more here. So I only have the lock unlock button. This might be a heated grip switch, but whatever you have, just get it disconnected so we can remove it. Now we'll put our tank cover on. Don't necessarily need one of these. If you don't, just be careful. You can also use like a blanket or a towel or something similar. Now we can disconnect our switches and take off our clutch and brake. Just gonna work one side at a time. So the first step is we're gonna remove our switch housing, and that's held together with two T20 screws. So depending on how your bike is set up, your clutch and brake lever might actually be in the way of backing those screws out in the back. So if that's the case, we'll need to just loosen up the clamp for now, then we can rotate it out of the way to be able to back those out. So that clamp is, the 2 screws holding that together are a 5mm Allen. Just gonna loosen those for now just so I can rotate it out of the way enough to get to those screws in the back. All right, so bringing you around to the front of the bike just to get a better view. So we took out the 2 screws that held the switch housing together. Now there's 2 more screws that we need to back out, and the actual switches we'll be able to open up and we can take those off. So same size of screws here, T20. So now I can open this up, and you want to be careful not to be too aggressive because that is somewhat delicate, and if you tear that, this switch housing is about 350 bucks, so don't tear it. When I rotate it down, you can see all the wires that run into the switches and where they go. So there's little holes where we can take a pick or a small screwdriver or something. We'll press that and it'll just pop right out. And this one right here is actually connected to the clutch, so we need to remove this whole switch housing before we can take the clutch off. Now we can remove the clutch clamp and then take the clutch off. And then you can just let this dangle down by the side. I'm just gonna tuck it into our little pouch right here just to keep it out of the way. Then we can move on to the right. So the right side is the same deal. We just have 2 screws holding the switch housing together, and there's no wires or connections coming from the brake to the switch housing, so I can just go ahead and back these all the way out now and take the clamp completely off. And you can let this dangle out of the way. I would recommend having it upright. I'm just gonna, again, hook it over here into our little pouch, and then we can back these 2 screws out. Same thing over here, we have 2 connections. If you have heated grips, this will be plugged into the grip, so that's why that one's there. So now we're going to move up front. We're going to remove our headlight and headlight trim. Getting that out of the way will give us access to our switch harness wire connection, and then we'll disconnect that. Again, in here, just use a screwdriver, something similar, preferably something soft to get this out just so you don't mar up your finish. And then we have these 4 hex heads around the light that we need to back out. It's a 10mm hex head. Then we can disconnect the light. So that'll expose the wiring harness that we need to disconnect. It's this white one right here. Once you get all that out of the way, it's easy to see, but it might be kind of hard to get your hands in there and actually disconnect it. But it's just a little tab that you got to depress and then pull those 2 pieces apart. Mine have already been cut, but there are a couple zip ties holding this wire in place. So just follow the wire from the connection, disconnect any zip ties or cut them, and that'll allow you to move it out a little bit and pull it out just to give yourself a little bit more access to the plug. And then you just depress that and split them. If you can't get the switch harness freed up by working through the headlight hole, what you can do is actually remove the whole outer fairing shell. To do that, it's a lot easier to do if you take the windshield off first. So there's just 5 screws holding that on, here, 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 and then same on this side. Then once you get those out, there are 4 screws on the inner lip of the fairing. You can back all 4 of those out. And then there's also, this is the same on both sides, there's 2 screws down the sides, and then there's 2 screws underneath here that hold this speaker cover in place. You can remove that, and then there's 1 more screw on the inside of that cover. You can back that out, do the same on both sides, and then you can pull the outer shell off. So from here, you actually have a couple options. One, you can pull the wire harness out through the headlight. What you have to do is disconnect the throttle, and I'll show you how to do that here in a little bit. Then you just pull it out through the bars and through the light. I'm gonna do it a different way, where I'm gonna leave the wires in the bars and then just pull the bars off and the wires out this way, all together in one piece. And if you do it this way, one thing that'll help is if you just find where the wires exit the bar at the bottom and just pull the wires through a little bit, just so that way when you're pulling the bars off, that connection doesn't get caught on anything. So just pull them through a little bit just to make it a little bit easier later on. All right, just a couple more things. We have our brake line bracket right there. We're gonna back that bolt out. Should be a 4mm Allen. Let's move that out of the way. And then we're gonna remove the riser bolts on both sides, and then we'll just remove the bars with the clamp still installed. The riser bolts are a 19mm hex head. They're on there pretty good, but should have plenty of room to break it loose. Now we can take out the left one. One thing to be sure of is when you take out this one, that's the last thing holding the bar in, so you want to make sure you have a good grip on the bar just so it doesn't fall. Now we can just work the bars out of there. Still might be kind of tight. Just kind of have to rotate it down around one side of the tank. Okay, now we can move on to removing the handlebar riser clamp. So there's just 4 screws that hold this clamp together. They're 6mm Allens. Back both those out. Okay, now we can get our twist grip sensor disconnected. I'm just gonna pull it out just a tad, and that'll expose the connection here at the top. So we can disconnect it, pull the throttle out, and pull the wires out the bottom. Little tab right there, just press on it. Now we can just pull the wires out. And then we can take our grip off. So if this is the first time you're doing this and you have the stock grip, this grip is going to be glued on there, so it might be kind of difficult to get off, but you just kind of have to twist it, and that'll break the glue, and then you can pull it out. So now we can get the Tab Performance bar rigged up. I'm going to be putting on our 6/over bar. We also have a 4/over and an 8/over. The first thing I want to do is just get our wires ran back through. First thing I'm going to do to get that done, just run a string through. Once I get the string through, I'm going to use this applied braided sleeve to pull the wires up through the bar. I'm going to be using compressed air to blow the string through the bar. If you don't have compressed air, what you can do is just tie something heavy to the string and then just use gravity to maneuver the string through the bar. One thing I've shown before is just to take a small socket that's heavy enough to pull the weight of the string, but also small enough to fit through the bar, and then just slide it over the string and tape it in place, and just let that, the weight of the socket pull the string through the bar. Then what I like to do is tape our switch harness to the braided sleeve. So I'm going to slide those in there. And I'm just going to put a little bit of tape around that to make sure it doesn't go anywhere. You don't need to use the braided sleeve. I just like to use it because it helps protect the wires, the connections as you're pulling them through, and it helps round out those 90-degree angles on the connections. Just allows it to get pulled through this tight bend up here a little more easily. Once we get to the top here, I'm going to stop pulling just till I can see that tape, and then I'm going to remove the tape. We can get our clamp put back on. So you want to make sure you put this on the right way. There's a little cutout in the front of the clamp that'll line up with the cutout in the bottom of the bar where the wires come out. So that's how you know which way this thing goes. The risers only go one way as well. So in the top part of the clamp, the front side, there's no threads in it. The threads are in the bottom side on the actual riser. So the bolt will go through the top part of the clamp and thread into the riser on the front, and then on the back side it's just the reverse. So it'll go through the riser and thread in through the clamp. So you know, make sure you want to put that on the right way, because you can flip-flop it, but once you go to put it on, it won't fit. And then we do put two little dimples in our bar where the wires come out, and that is where you want to line up the clamp. So that way you can just get the clamp fully tightened down and then just go ahead and reinstall it on the bike without having to do any adjusting. So here's a close-up of the two small marks that you'll use to line up the top part of the clamp. You just want to line the underside of the top clamp up with those two little dimples. And I have them just like that. So I just have it just off of those two little dimples. And then you want to have the cutout for the clamp spaced evenly inside the cutout for the wires. Just hold the riser in place and get our bolts put back in. So once those start to snug themselves down, you do want to just verify that you're still good on those marks, just right above those marks, and still square within that cutout. Once you got them all snug down, then we can go ahead and torque them down to 18 foot-pounds. Get our twist grip sensor reinstalled. Now we can slip over our throttle. You don't have to do this now, but I'm gonna get our right hand switch and switch housing reinstalled. For me, it's just a little bit easier to do it off the bike because you have to line up. There's a little dowel inside the switches that lines up with the dowel in the bar. And it's just easier for me to see and get a better angle on it while it's off. Now we can reinstall the 2 screws we took out earlier. And then as you do that, you want to make sure the clamp closes fully and seats all the way around. If it doesn't, that means you're either closed up on a wire or not fully seated in that dowel. And then just position it, work it around until it closes fully. And then we can reconnect our switches here. So this white one, that's for our heated grips. We're not going to be using that. And then there's one other smaller one. There's 2 spots for small plugs to go. So it only goes in one way. It doesn't fit in the other one. So just put it in the one that it fits in. It should be the bottom one. Make sure they're seated fully. And then this switch for the heated grip, that can just tuck back behind here, just like that. Then we can put our outer shell on. It's the same thing with the outer shell. If it's not closing fully, just take it back apart. There's probably some wires that are bunching up that are preventing you from getting it fully closed down. But now that that's on there, we can go ahead and get this reinstalled. Just how we took it out, we're just gonna go ahead and slide it back in there. Once it's on there, before you get the riser bolts in, you're gonna make sure you have your wires pulled over the triple tree, because what you don't wanna do is get these tightened down and cinch them down onto the triple tree. When you verify that they're pulled over, just go ahead and let those rest for now. Now we can reinstall the riser bolts, and I'll try to keep out of the way here, but you're just gonna slide them up through the bottom. And then you can adjust and maneuver the bar so it lines up with that bolt. Get one of them started. Then we can let that hang there and move to the other side and get that one going. Now on to the left side. One thing I want to point out before we get that in there is here's our switch harness. Here's our clutch cable. You want to make sure that the switch harness is routed over the triple tree and not pinched underneath the bar, because that can cause issues with not having enough slack. Also, it can pinch the wires and cause them to fray, and then you won't have any working instruments. So we want to make sure we get that pushed through. Also, if you get the riser bolt fully tightened down on both sides, there won't be enough room to push this harness through anyway, so you know, make sure you get this where it needs to go before you get that tight. All right, now I'm gonna finish pulling the slack through, and then I'll tighten those down. Then we can get our riser bolts torqued down to 60 foot-pounds. Now I'll get the left switches going. First thing, we're going to reconnect. One plug there. Again, that's the heated grip. Get our grip installed, and this is keyed, so it only goes on one way. So this can be a little bit tricky because you're trying to line up the switch alignment little pin with the hole in the bar, and also you're trying to line up the key with the backside of the switch housing. So if you just get the switch housing alignment dowel in place, and then you can kind of twist the grip to line up with the key on the backside. Just like that. Now we can get our clutch started. So we got to get our clutch at least loosely on there because we have the safety switch coming from our clutch to the housing, so we need to get that connected before we put the housing back together. And then we can take clutch switch and reinstall it into the bottom slot on the back side of the switches. Then we can take our switch housing, make sure all of our wires are tucked in. Get our clamp tightened down. I'm still gonna leave this a little bit loose so that way I can do some final adjustments. And get our brake reinstalled. Here's our switch harness that we pulled through. Make sure it's not pinching or anything. That reconnected. Reconnect our headlight. Now we can get our tank console put back on. You do want to make sure you get whatever connections you have reconnected. So I pulled the bike out of our chock so that way I can get to these two things back here. One, we have our tank console cover. There's a bolt that we need to put back in there. And then I'm gonna reattach our brake line bracket. Just go back on there right like that. If you have the +4s or the +6, you're good to go ahead and put that back in there. If you go with our +8 option, you might not have enough room. The cable just might not sit right to put that back in there. So if you're running the +8, you might have to remove this completely. And then I can tighten down the bolt for the front part of our tank console. Now I'm gonna get the clutch and brake levers positioned in a spot that's comfortable for me, and then I'll get them tightened down. Once I get those set, what you'll wanna do is go ahead and put the bike in run mode just to make sure that everything works, your lights come on. One other thing too is you wanna make sure they come on, but you also wanna make sure that they work. So you might get lights turned on, but when you go to hit the blinker or the starter or the windshield or whatever, nothing happens, they're just constantly lit. If that happens, one common problem is one of your wires in the wiring harness got pinched somewhere, and it got pinched to the point where you have exposed wires that are grounding out on another piece of metal. So that's one spot you can check if that happens. Also, we have a bunch of connections like we saw inside the switch housings and our twist grip sensor. So a couple things to check, but hopefully you won't have any issues with that. So if you're interested in more pictures, we've got more pictures on our website and our Instagram page. So if you have any questions, be sure to shoot them down below or just give us a call, but that's all there is to it. So now I'm just gonna wheel this outside and see how it feels.